हमारे
रवि, दो तीन मिनट के बाद, 1 मिनट के बाद चालू कर सकता है। I think Ravi, we might start.
Start? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to the webinar on research and education during COVID-19 pandemic and opportunity for all, being conducted by Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, Institute of Cell and Molecular Biology, Faculty of Science, the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda.
I can't see you.
The speaker for today's webinar is Professor L.S. Shashidhara, who is Professor of Biology at IISER Pune and currently on leave as Distinguished Professor at Ashoka University. I welcome you, sir. Today we have with us in the panel Professor Parimal Vyas, Honorable Vice Chancellor, the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda, Professor Haribhai Kataria, Dean Faculty of Science and Director of Vikram Sarabhai Institute of Cell and Molecular Biology. Also we have with us Professor Sarita Gupta, Joint Director, Vikram Sarabhai Institute of Cell and Molecular Biology, and Dr. Mayur Sahani, Assistant Professor at Vikram Sarabhai Institute of Cell and Molecular Biology. Now I invite Professor Sarita Gupta to play a key role in initiating this program to start the proceedings.
So, welcome everyone. I am very happy that Professor Shashidhara has agreed to join us and give a very informative thing on this webinar. First of all, I must thank Professor Parimal Vyas ji, sir, because he was very busy and now he actually came and he is ready to give some welcome address for our attendees, and this is a great opportunity for us. So before we start the webinar, I first want to introduce Professor Parimal Vyas, our Vice Chancellor of MS University of Baroda. Professor Parimal Vyas is one of the Vice Chancellor who has got the second term as Vice Chancellor, and it is his academic and administrative capability which has actually given us an opportunity to grow well for the MS University. And because of his effort, we could get the NAC accreditation in 2016, which is 3.16. Before that, I would like to introduce Professor Parimal Vyas. He is one of the only professor who has got a joint professorship as in the management faculty as well as in the commerce faculty, and he is the one who has played a key role, as I said, to get the NAC accreditation as 3.16 in 2016. He is professor of management and he has a large number of papers to his credit. He has got 11 awards for recognition of the research which he has performed, and he has around more than 130 research papers to his credit, and around 103 papers he has actually presented nationally and internationally. Also that being such a qualified and a very motivated person as a Vice Chancellor in our university, we have actually seen lot of growth in last few years. And I would say that because of his leadership, the Cell and Molecular Biology program, which we started in 2012, actually there were a lot of hurdles initially, but it is his support because of which we could actually completely started this particular program, and we are still in a position to run it in a very much better position. Of course, we need more things, but then still we are able to do it. I would like to tell more about Professor Parimal Vyas. He has been a person who has got UGC as well as like he is a member of many committees being from the UGC, as well as he is a member of NAC committees at different places, and also he is a member of NBA, that is National Accreditation Board. with this particular small introduction. Of course, it is very difficult to talk for such people, but with this small introduction, I request Professor Parimal Vyas to say a few words. And thanks again, sir, for taking out time for us. Sir, please.
Namaskar. I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Let me first of all appreciate the support that we are receiving from today's speaker, Professor Shashidhara. Welcome, sir, to MS University of Baroda, and I hope you are familiar with the cellular molecular biology program, because you are also on the advisory of the program. And I congratulate Professor Haribhai Kataria, the Dean of the Faculty of Science. We all know that this program of cell and molecular biology is very close to our heart, and it's a unique program. Let's be very clear about it. It's a very unique program with a focus on research. Probably the kind of scenario that we are facing, if not today, tomorrow, we expect to turn out good number of research professionals, and as all those attendees who are here today for this webinar, I'm happy to share with all of you that we offer an integrated program in cellular and molecular biology of years, and the focus is more on the research. And it's a very different kind of a program, though the exit is available at the end of 3 years, but then large number of students, they continue to pursue their studies, after 3 years, that is the completion of graduation. And we have tried to, create collaborations with various research agencies, various research institutions across the country. And we expect our students, to go and be and carry out the research work in those institutions. We have tried to tap the best talent available in the field as far as cell and molecular biology is concerned. And I think today's webinar on the research and education during COVID-19, I think we are expecting now to come out of these. Not we are really not very sure how long it would take. That's a question that only time would be able to tell us. But one thing is very clear, that such a big country of such a big size, we will have to appreciate that 130 crore Indians, the way they have fought with this COVID with a voluntary lockdown. You go to any part of the country, though now we are on lock 1, but after 9 o'clock, you find there is a voluntary lockdown which happens. You find almost most of the people, they wear masks, they observe the social distancing. I think the question is that now it is education versus economy, because we are all educationists now, whether we should give priority to economy or whether we should give priority to education. Another good thing which I would share with all of you, all the attendees who are today with us to listen to Professor Shashidharan, is that I'll tell you, let us be very honest. Online education in our country was that you have a mounted LCD projector and you teach them. Even we would not make them, we would not expose our students with the live website experience. So it was just using LCD projector. Maybe this is the scenario in almost most of the academic institutions. There are few exceptions where they use the state of art, but then there are very few. But from 15th March to, if I look at nearly now 15th June, more than 1,000 universities, and you find each and every institution, maybe a small college, I think they have tapped the potential available. They have invited experts, and then webinars are conducted. I think this is one thing which I would like to highlight. The way in India academicians, they have fine-tuned themselves. I would also appreciate and say that yes, students, of course, students, the Generation Z that we are dealing with, they're techno-savvy. You need not tell them. In fact, rather you to learn and get inspiration from them, in adopting and fine-tuning the use of technology. But I think this country has really proved that yes, Indians are capable of coping up with any kind of exigencies, any unwarranted situation that we are facing. And I think there are encouraging news that we are now getting at the national level that yes, the rate of recovery is now it's going up around 60%. If you look at the rate of mortality, I would say that of course it's a very challenging task. But then in a relative terms, I would say that this country has done excellent. We have done well. As such also immunity of our country, people of our country is good. But then I believe it has also raised certain issues because you're going to talk about research and education. I believe we really need to put a lot of emphasis on health and hygiene. I think this is extremely important because I was just looking at the topic and then made an attempt. Somebody has done a review of literature which is available in the body of knowledge on COVID, and I think the first paper was published on COVID coronaviruses. If you go to that body of knowledge, the first paper was published by somebody in 1930s. So it's not something new that has suddenly come up. People, they feel, oh, it is something new that has come up. No, probably it is very much there and we are all living with that. But the intensity and the kind of impact, the spread and the death that it has caused, I believe that has happened, in the recent past. I really do not want to repeat story because each one of us is aware of. But one expectation which I have, Professor Sarita, from you is that because, when you talk about life sciences, probably you are leading the department. You are also part of biochemistry. We have a microbiology. We have a biotechnology. And we have Professor Haribhai with us. So what I want, let us be very clear, University Grants Commission and the Government of Gujarat, they want each university to introduce at least a capsule of 2 credit course on Corona. To make it is not just to give them some grade or conduct examination, but I believe this year when now we have started admissions, I believe if you can, maybe Professor Haribhai can sit with his team and can explore, can we design an online course on this COVID-19 with the experts available? It would not be a part of curriculum. Let us be very clear. Let us not relate it with the examination, but we make it mandatory. Once you design that course with the experts like Professor Sasidhara from Asoka is with us, there are many more experts who can really give their input. You can take their input and then maybe if you can design 10, 12, 20 hours course, I believe we ask students that before they come to campus, they will to, pass through that. There can be some quiz. I come across some quizzes which are being conducted by various universities. But University Grant Commission, Department of Education, Government of Gujarat expects each and every university to, introduce a course, not a course that we normally talk about. It would be a different kind of a course that we really need to introduce on COVID. I just thought that let me share these thoughts because you're having a webinar on this research and education. So I thought this is what we really need to do. Professor Sasidhara ji, we in fact are trying to develop a lab, because that is, I'll tell you, the rules of the game would now get changed. So we'll have to develop laboratories. So for the level 4, the biosafety level 4, we are in a process. We have already approved the financial support to our teachers, because all those attendees who are with us. I would also like to share on behalf of Professor Haribhai Kataria and Professor Sarita Gupta that we have set up an institute which is known as an Institute of Interdisciplinary Research and Studies. The whole idea is that, it is not just that we need only a group of scientists to work. You need people from diverse disciplines to come out, and then maybe they are working together to fight against COVID. It could be clinical one, efforts are on, and there could be many other researches which I think we would be required to carry out in a near future. So I would also like Professor Haribhai or Professor Sarita Gupta to share these opportunities which are available with all those attendees who are joining our webinar for the first time. I believe we really need to work a lot in developing a civic sense. I'll tell you the one feedback which I'm getting from whenever I talk to bureaucrats, when I talk to people who are from medical profession, I'll tell you earlier we were not ready to accept that COVID is there. Then later on we realized that no, it is there, because we could see that the people, they started, now we started getting incidents, and we started getting factual data of death of people because of COVID. We could see that. So I think a state of denial was there earlier, that we were not ready to believe. Then the state of acceptance has come. Now the third stage is the stage of realization that yes, I think we would accept, and we really need to take care of our surrounding. We really need to take care of our family. We really need to take care of our friends and our people if they're working with us and academic institution. After that realization and acceptance, now I think the stage which has come is, now I think we are trying to fine tune. So that is very important, because I believe if you anyone would have talked on 15th of March, I would say that we would not have accepted today. Now I think when we have unlocked today in the afternoon, Honorable CM of Delhi has also said that no, we are not going to unlock, we are not going to have a lockdown, maybe because there is some discussion going on that from 15 June they are likely to impose again lockdown. No, I don't think we have more than 70 days of lockdown, and I believe that now we are all going to pass through an acid test of our civic sense. We will have to self-discipline ourselves in our interactions. We will have to wear a mask. We will have to ensure physical distance, not social distance. We will have to learn how to use information and technology. And I'm not sure about other states, but I believe from 15th August, Government of Gujarat has already notified that schools will reopen and online education will start. In the state of Gujarat, universities and colleges, now I think 6 days away, next Monday, 22nd, we are going to reopen. Admissions are happening online. So what I want to conclude before I, conclude my address to you is that it's very important. We all will have to learn new rules of the game, new ways of living. And I think we Indians, we have shown the world how to fight out such, exigencies, such crises in past. We will be able to do it without any hesitation. So once again, I welcome Professor Shashidhara ji. Thanks for support to the university. And we look forward again inviting you to the Institute of Cell and Molecular Biology. And all the very best to Professor Sarita Gupta, and congratulations, Professor Haribhai, for organizing a wonderful webinar. Thank you very much, and all the very best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining.
Yeah.
And we will take care of what you said. We will certainly look forward.
All the very best.
Yes, sir.
Now it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Haribhai Kataria. Professor Haribhai Kataria is a professor of mathematics and is currently serving as Dean, Faculty of Science. He has over 25 years of experience in teaching, research, and administration, and has held various positions in the university, including Senate and Syndicate member, Proctor, Dean of Students, and HOD. He has introduced several programs in Faculty of Science to popularize science and research activities. I would like to invite him now to say a few words.
Oh. Can you listen me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. We can listen.
Okay. Let me welcome Professor Parimal Bhai Vyas, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Shashidhara, Professor Sarita Gupta, Joint Director, CMB Program, Dr. Ravi, Dr. Mayur Sahani, my teachers, friends, and dear students. It's a matter of pleasure for us that today we have very renowned speaker, Professor Shashidhara. Professor Shashidhara is presently professor at Ashoka University, Delhi. Previously, he was chair of Biological Science, IISER, Pune. He is associated with many committees nationally and internationally related with science education and research. And therefore, today's topic is related to present and future of research and education in the pandemic situation of COVID-19. This is a very important for faculty members, researchers, and students. He will be sharing his views on how this pandemic situation can be better utilized by the scientific community to perform mission-oriented research with greater vigor. To understand pandemic, the major goal shall be exchange of data nationally and internationally and move towards fruitful collaborations. In light of technology advancement, he will be sharing his views on advancement in teaching techniques for benefit of students. Further, how shall we protect ourselves in this situation and how these lessons will be useful in future to fight with such pandemic situations are some of the highlights of today's webinar. Sir, on behalf of the university, on behalf of the faculty, we welcome you, sir. I take this opportunity to thank you for sparing your valuable time and knowledge with us. I take this opportunity to acknowledge the efforts of the CMB department and particularly of Professor Sarita Gupta, Dr. Ravi Vijay Kumar, and Dr. Mayur Sahani. I congratulate the department for organizing such wonderful webinar and inviting Professor Shashidhara, that a very appropriate speaker for today's webinar. I take this opportunity to thanks for inviting me and giving me a chance for sharing few words. Thanks one and all present. I welcome all the participants and I am sure that you all will be benefited by the knowledge of Professor Shashidhara. Thanks one and all present. Thank you. Over to Ravi.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for your encouraging words. Now, I would like to request Professor Sarita Gupta, Joint Director of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai Institute of Cell and Molecular Biology, to introduce the speaker to us.
Thank you, Ravi. And thanks, Professor Kataria, sir, for your inspiring words and also the words shared by Professor Parimal Vyas, our Vice Chancellor. I'm very happy and thankful to Professor Shashidhara for accepting our invitation to give this webinar. I'm going to introduce Professor Shashidhara. It's a very difficult task to introduce, but I will try. Professor L.S. Shashidhara is at present, as you already heard, is a distinguished professor at Ashoka University. And he did his PhD from Cambridge. And after doing his PhD, he joined CCMB. And there he started his own group of research where he has developed developmental biology as one of the major area of his research. After that, he has moved to IISER Pune. IISER Pune, I think he is one of the very important person as far as the biological science growth is concerned in the IISER Pune. He was chair for a very long time at ICER Pune. And in fact, he is the one who has, as far as I remember and as far as my association goes with Professor Shashidhara, I can say that he has played a very, very key role in the upgradation of the biological science at ICER Pune. And then after that, recently, as I said, he joined Ashoka University. Professor Shashidhara is also a Bhatnagar awardee, and he has also been an INSA vice president for a very long period of time. He is also a JC Bose fellow, and I think all of you know the importance of these fellowships. They are so important that talks about how is a good career that Professor Shashidhara has. He is also at present the president of IUBS, which is an International Union of Biological Sciences. And he is a steering committee member of large number of international committees, and one of them is climate change education. He is also in high level political forum at United States, and he has been recognized as as I said, he is also one of the very associate member of IMBO, which is an international recognition of excellence in research in life science. Apart from that, Professor Shashidhara is chair and co-chair of various apex committees. And these apex committees are basically from Science and Education, Science and Technology Organization, which is from Government of India. And he has facilitated training of more than 10,000 school teachers and also the university teachers for adopting very good or excellent teaching methods. And that is what is one of the very important area what he has been working on, apart from his research area, which is mainly in relation to molecular biology, genetics, and also the developmental biology. Apart from all this, we have a very special likelihood, or I have a very special love for Professor Shashidhara, and that is because he has been with us since the inception of the Cell and Molecular Biology program. And when we started looking for the course, curriculum, etc., from the day one, he is always with us. And for our inaugural function, the first inauguration, which was held in 2012, he was our chief guest. Later, he has been coming to the department several times, and I know that most of our CMB students have heard him and they have interacted with him. Not only the students, but also the faculty members who are in biochemistry department as well as in CMB department has interacted with him, because he was also our UGC committee external expert for biochemistry department, and we had many chances to interact with him, and we really got lot of knowledge. We gained lot of knowledge by interacting with him in the field of how to go ahead, how to do research, what are the things, how to approach the funding agencies, and so forth. So I'm very happy that he is with us today, and he is going to share his views on today's topic, that is science and education in this pandemic time of COVID-19. With these words, I request Professor Shashidhara to please deliver his address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Rita Gupta, Ravi, Professor Mayur, Professor Haribai, and also Parimal Vyas, sir, for giving this opportunity. Always love to come to MSU Baroda. This time it's a virtual visit, and hopefully, in not too distant in future, I'll be able to come and visit and then talk to all of you and interact with the students. So let me start sharing my screen and regarding today's topic. So, what I'll do in quickly, hopefully I'll sort of maybe, talk for about 30 minutes, and I would like to actually interact, and if students or anybody have questions, that would be nice to interact. I'm going to talk about what's happening just in the last 3 or 4 months and how this would help us to change the way we do our research, the way we do our education in the coming years, if we have learned a lesson and we want to retain that lesson. right? Obviously, there is always an if and a but, right? In every life, there's always there. Now, again, from historical perspective, if you look at it, COVID is not the only pandemic that we had. We have had many pandemics earlier. We also had many other disasters. It could be human-made disaster, particularly man-made disaster. And I would be very particular to use the gender here, like wars, for example, First World War or Second World War, whatever you talk although it was mostly concentrated in Europe, but still it was a world war because there are many more countries were involved all the way up to Japan and this side. So when we talk about wars, particularly large wars like world wars, or you take natural disasters, particularly like pandemic, because any other natural disaster like floods or cyclones or hurricanes would have a local impact. Something which will have a global impact. Usually it's a big disease or it has to be a war, right? Now, in the context of man-made disasters like war or the natural calamities like a pandemic like coronavirus pandemic that we have today, people have reacted differently in different times. But one thing is sure, there is some kind of a resilience in human species to somehow survive this, right? And the reason is people collaborate because we have the ability to analytically look at something, talk to each other, understand from each other, and then try to solve the problem, right? This is something human specific. And because of this, we have been able to come out of many crises. And actually, every time a crisis is over, the new part of the civilization has actually strengthened further, right? The civilization gets strengthened. It doesn't mean that we should always go through crisis to get further strengthened. If you are intelligent enough, if you are compassionate enough, if you are rational enough, we should be able to do this without having to go through a crisis. But generally, crisis is also a way of giving us some way of, a momentum, a catalyst kind of a role to change. Because what happens is, typically we always are at a low energy level or minimal energy level. We always want to get into a steady state level. And if you want to change, you need certain kind of a force, right? It's simple Newtonian mechanics. It also applies to societal dynamics. And that kind of a force many times comes, either because of crisis. Like, for example, 1991, July 24, then Finance Minister Mr. Manmohan Singh proposed a new budget for India, reforms. And that was also caused because of the precipitated situation of a financial crisis. It's not that suddenly India woke up to a new world thinking that, we should change ourselves, right? So the force was, again, a small crisis at that time. Perhaps is a bigger crisis too, if we had not reformed at that time, right? So similarly, what is that we are going through this, particularly for students, I want to tell you, is that we need to learn from this and change ourselves. Again, when we say a crisis, we all have to understand that most of us, almost all of us who are listening, I'm speaking here on Zoom, and all of you are listening to my talk over Zoom or over Facebook, you're not really actually suffering as much as a larger population of the people who are suffering elsewhere, who are not part of our group at all, right? There are millions and hundreds, tens of hundreds of millions of people. They are suffering much more than all of us. And how to improve the quality of life for them, right? And they are the ones who are suffering, not necessarily because of the infection, as a collateral damage. They are suffering because they have lost their livelihoods, right? So one of the things we always need to worry about is how to deal with a pandemic is also not just looking at from the science point of view, what is this virus, how it causes the disease, how to cure the disease, how to develop a vaccine. That is one part of it. The second part of it is also an interdisciplinary component where how to ensure that there is no collateral impact on beyond the certain limited way of how what infection causes an impact, right? This lesson we have learned this time, which was not there earlier. For example, 1919, the Spanish flu, the way it spread, the way it impacted the people, actually the impact was much more uniform between people who are poor versus people who are rich. It was not so much different the way it's happening now. Here, there is a clear inequality in the way people are being impacted. And this is because the kind of world that we are living in. I'll come to that in a minute. And so what is that lesson we have learned and how we need to improve our world, how to make it more sustainable, how to make it more equitable is something we need to worry about. In fact, sustainable and equitable world is a buzzword for the last 15, 20 years, particularly in the context of climate change and extreme weather conditions, which is impacting more of the poor people than the people who could afford. Already people are talking about how climate change and extreme weathers would bring in more inequality in the society, and how what scientists could do to mitigate the impact of climate change and bring in more sustainable living living standards to the world. This pandemic has actually given a harsh lesson. What we were thinking that climate change will which is teaching us a lesson, looks like it was not harsh enough the way COVID is giving us a lesson. So this is not about COVID. This talk is not about COVID, but I'm going to use some of the examples to tell how we have learned some lessons and what we are doing today and what we could do by the lessons that we have learned today. So one of the things all of you must have heard about R value, R naught, right? What is R naught for COVID-19 versus Zika or measles or Ebola, HIV, season flu, or virus and kind of stuff. R naught is something where you say that how many people get affected from one single infected person, right? So it's different for different types of diseases. More the R naught means more lethal the disease is. Less lethal is the disease is, because if I'm get infected and I carry the virus for longer time, more the time I carry the virus, more the chances that I would infect other people. But if the virus is really lethal, it causes deadly disease. Typically, I get infected, I die, and it's very unlikely that I would transmit to more number of people, right? For example, for Zika virus or HIV or Ebola, it's more than 2. In Zika and HIV, it's more than 3. It's because of the level of the disease it causes. People, first of all, they get isolated very quickly because of the disease itself is very visible. Second is it causes lethality so much that it won't infect others. Whereas the measles, for example, or chickenpox, which all of us are familiar with, it hardly some symptoms and people don't isolate themselves so easily, and in the context it starts spreading more. And because it's not lethal, people are also not scared of so they don't have to maintain the physical distancing between the infected people, so it spreads more. Coronavirus is somewhere in between. Neither it is as severe as Zika or HIV or Ebola, or HIV or Zika. At the same time, it is not as less severe as seasonal flu or measles. It is about 2, right? But now the recent calculation is it may be less than 2, 1.5 or something like that. And because there are a large number of asymptomatic people and they are spreading, right? But at the same time, the percentage of people who are in the hospital at the critical care or the requiring ventilator, it's still a small percentage, something like 5%. And the mortality is less than 2% or maybe around 2%. Because of this, we consider this as a milder disease. The reason it has become a pandemic, it's not because it's actually a severe disease and a virus has a very good ability to move from one person to another person. It moves through the aerosols and none of this is true. People are basically calculating all kinds of mathematical models and how it spreads. Some people are simply guessing because it's spreading it so fast. It's spreading on 5G, it's not spreading on a light speed, it's not spreading through the air. What is happening is it's the fact that the way we live today, the kind of mobility that we have, that has enabled this virus to spread much more than the way earlier viruses used to spread, particularly earlier pandemic like Spanish flu, right? The Wuhan, it was first ones reported sometime late December. Already it was in Hong Kong, in South Korea. By end of January, it was already in India, and it entered Europe by beginning of February, and the rest of the world by end of March, right? because of the kind of world that we are living. Movement of cargo, movement of people. Cargo doesn't mean that it will be only an aircraft comes. Then aircraft crew will be there, even if there are no passengers, right? So spreading is happening because of our mobility, increased mobility, and that world is what we need to think about, whether should we continue to be in this kind of a world or should we change the way we live, right? That's the first lesson. The second is people are always were worried by in the beginning of March or particularly in April when it was spreading like anything. People were getting killed in New York, in London, in Paris, Madrid, in Italy and everywhere. Although in India still we are lucky to have low mortality, although number is increasing very high, fast now. Is what this virus is going, will it affect our civilization itself? Will it will damage the world so much that we'll not be able to recover very easily? Are we going to lose an entire generation? And are we going to stop our schools and colleges for the next 2 to 3 years? Are we going to stop all our economy, air travel, everything for months or more than a year? So these are the kind of questions people are asking. People are trying to make it, project it as a worst possible ways that this is what is going to happen. And what will we do? Will it really stop us the way we are, a civilized society, or will it change, towards the worse, or can we do something about it? So very soon, the science of, the particularly the biologist and the mathematical biologist, epidemiologist came out with variety of different ideas in which we can actually contain this. How do we do this? Can we stop this? Is the question people are asking. Though the international collaboration that was set in as soon as this virus appeared and started infecting people was unprecedented, right? People started, understanding the virus and the way they started collaborating with each other, cooperating with each other, sharing the information, the way the peer review has happened openly on the internet, and how external validation is being done. For example, if someone is saying that, perhaps hydrochloroquine, has some impact as a prophylactic drug, and immediately the clinical trial was done in multiple different places, or some drug was predicted, as part of the repurposing. I'll come to that in a minute, and immediately it was, tried elsewhere too. And vaccines, there are hundreds of programs on vaccines, and everywhere people are talking to each other, and there's no business competition normally you would see in drug development or vaccine development program. Everybody is open about what they're doing, right? This itself is actually a very promising that, humanity can actually reason itself to address a calamity like this, right? So within days of appearance of COVID-19 symptoms, scientists have discovered the virus, how it infects the humans, how it causes the disease, how it spreads. And it also we had made considerable advance in design and strategies to test, isolate, and quarantine. And within weeks, we also have, our preparedness is increased. We can actually say 2 weeks from now, what would be the number of cases, what could be the mortality, how to prevent this, which particular kind of, streets, kind of, living habitats will have more infections, how to, identify super spreaders, how to stop them, variety of different ways people are working on it. And actually there are results coming out of it. Otherwise, the situation would have been far, far worse by now, right? And so I'll skip all of these things. Now, we already have, a lot of, hopes for a new vaccine. There are more than 100 different, attempts to make vaccines. Even 1 or 2 of them become successful, it'll be good enough, because, we can replicate and make, billions of doses of vaccine for mass vaccination program across the world. The social solidarity which has come, although interesting, we kept on talking about social distancing. Actually, social distancing is a misnomer, particularly in Indian context. We should use the word physical distancing, but with social solidarity. And that social solidarity has come because of the confidence in scientific methods, in scientific discoveries, that we should be able to address this problem scientifically And the only way we can do is use the methods of science. Methods of science involves independent observations, multiple replicates, reproducibility of the results, and peer review, right? And all of these are being rigorously followed. Of course, there are loopholes, there are people, all kinds of claims coming, but those claims are immediately thrown out. People already, for example, last week, 2 papers were retracted on Remdesivir, not Remdesivir, I think it was on hydroxychloroquine, some kind of a drug related. So as you can see here, people can actually, following the scientific methods, and science is correcting itself, because there are also some loose science, during this time. It always happens because of the noise around the COVID. I'll skip all of these things. There are neutralizing antibodies, which are very promising. Results are coming, and another neutralizing agent and drugs. For example, we know, for example, entire life cycle of a virus and what are the critical stages in which a drug can be developed. And using artificial intelligence and machine learning, people are also trying to see by which particular drug is already available in the market, which may inhibit the virus, even if it is a 50%, curative, properties. It's good enough. One advantage of using the repurposed drug is the drug is already in the market, and you don't have to go through elaborate clinical trials. It will not have much side effect anyway. We know it's already in the market. So, for example, if can we inhibit virus RNA replication, or its protein synthesis, or its the way it makes more and more viral particles, and by putting the envelope proteins, and the way it exocytosed from the cells to go outside. All of these are very different steps people are looking at and see where we can block the virus replication. And of course, there are a variety of different other therapeutic intervention, including blood plasma, and we're already promising results. There are some of them are already in the clinical trials, at least in the limited, treatment levels people are using. For example, plasma therapy is already being introduced for extreme cases. So what I sort of, very shortly or briefly try to explain is, it's although there was a crisis, this crisis is to some extent is human made, simply because the diseases are always there with us. And any disease to become a pandemic, there are 2 reasons. One is very unnatural way of the virus coming and infecting, and very different type of virus, or it's the way we live and we allow this to spread. It has happened earlier during the civilization too, in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, particularly during industrialization, 17th, 18th century. Many plague incidences were simply because large number of people were staying together in smaller localities, and sewage water and the drinking water supply used to get mixed, and the cholera or plague used to spread like anything, right? Now, so in a way, as you can see here, a disease which is a natural phenomena that every living organism wants to live, wants to increase its number. It's a constant fight between host and pathogen. And in this constant fight between host and pathogen, we are giving an opportunity to the pathogen to win over us, is simply by we live in the society, right? And that's what makes this pandemic rather than the virulence of the virus, right? So anyway, whatever the reason it became a pandemic, the way the society is addressing this pandemic, not just the scientists, a variety of different people, we have made mistakes also. For example, in Indian context, the way we put the lockdown, the way it is affecting the migrant population, the way the poor people are being affected, it could have been avoided with better planning. And these are the kind of, they're nothing to do with science. It could be simply the lack of better preparation or better understanding of the system and kind of stuff. But coming to the way it is being addressed sincerely, at least using the science and scientific methods, there is a momentum here, right? How to use this to actually take beyond COVID-19 world and see whether we can actually solve more problems of the world. Can we bring science out of our laboratories to the real world? The reason I'm using this particular, the last sentence here, all of the students here, particularly PhD students who are actually, if they are biologists, all of you have holding pipettes in your hand. All of you have done some molecular biology work. And how many of you actually thought that one day you may become a diagnostic person, right? I'm sitting right now in my office in IISER Pune. IISER Pune has become a COVID testing center. Large number of PhD students have joined this. They never, there could be a plant person, a microbiology person, or a human or Drosophila or C. elegans person working on some basic biology. And what they know is how to do RT-PCR, right? And the COVID-19 diagnosis method. They all have gathered and they have started giving, they're doing testing and giving the reports to the health authorities on using RT-PCR method. So they never thought that they were never dreamt that one day during that PhD, they would be actually directly solving a problem of the real world and providing solutions from their lab to save the lives. Every test done is actually a saving the life, right? And this is precisely what the bringing our science out of our library to the real world means, right? And people are working on vaccines, people are working on antibodies and variety of things. We never thought that they would do on this kind of work, right? So can we actually continue to do that kind of work is the question that we can ask, because we have done it once. Why can't we do it one more time, right? For example, climate change. All of us have been complaining about climate change, or talking about it and debating about it. And, it's part of a school debate, part of our college debates, and including institutes and universities everywhere. Then why can't we do something about it, right? Now it's the time, right? So what is our career? How we build our profession? What is that we are interested in? Why you think we have to do only this kind of research? Are we part of simply a current, a river flowing with heavy dirt, and all of us getting into we finish our school, we go to higher education for undergraduate program, postgraduate, do PhD, and get into a postdoctoral program. After postdoctoral, become a young faculty and continuously, publish papers. Is that what the flow, how this flow evolved over time? We are just part of that current. Have you ever thought that we can actually come out of this current and do something else? Can we jump out of the river and do something else? How many of us thought about it? But now this pandemic has created a situation where all of us can jump out of this big river of doing the way we're doing science for the last 50, 60 years and do something beyond, much more about the real world. In Indian context is very important because it's still large number of unsolved problems of real world exist in India. It could be infectious diseases, could be biodiversity, conservation, even to do basic science. The amount of biodiversity we have, the kind of ecosystem we have, the kind of diversity we have, human diversity or plant diversity, animal diversity, or microbial diversity, there's so much to discover here itself, particularly among biologists. It's same thing for earth sciences, physics, chemistry, everywhere. There is sufficient scope for us to discover, do basic science using the local resources, at the same time also provide local solution to the problem of sustainable world, right? And one of the things we can always talk about is in the context of COVID again is, zoonotic diseases, because we have still not understood enough that how do these zoonotic diseases arise, right? It's happening all the time. It's happened, for millions of years, hundreds of millions, even before human species evolved. There are already zoonotic diseases. What zoonotic disease basically means one animal to another animal. We just simply call, we are not part of the animal. So that's why we consider that something coming from a bat or a pangolin, or from a from a bird, or from a pig, that, we are acquiring some new diseases, but we are just another animal. We evolved only recently, maybe, a few 100,000 years ago from a common ancestor, great apes, but doesn't mean that we have a completely different anatomy, physiology, or immunology, right? Our immune system is not very different from a chimpanzee immune system. And many part of our microbes, the good ones, particularly our gut microbiome, has evolved in vertebrate system for much longer, and it's continuously evolving, and it's also evolving in human, right? It's not that we suddenly acquired a completely different set of microbiome in human species, which is different from other primates. Similarly, the disease causing viruses or malaria or anything is also, co-evolving along with other vertebrates for a very long time, particularly the disease which cause in warm-blooded animals, like in mammals. It's co-evolving with us for a very long time. And zoonotic disease is simply a word because we are living away from the forest, away from other animals. So we can call something as zoonotic disease. In that context, the reducing forest, in reducing biodiversity, or maintaining a certain level of biodiversity but reducing the scale of the population, these are the things one has to worry about, look at it, study, research. It's an interesting new biology one can discover. At the same time, it has immediate application. What is the impact of us reducing the biodiversity or reducing the forest coverage, reducing the population density of animals? To what extent it is making the viruses to spread beyond that host much faster, more frequently than earlier time. In just 20 years, this is not the first or the second, it's the fourth or fifth zoonotic disease to occur in the last 20 years, suggesting that something happening between human and the wildlife. And that's why we are having this kind of a occurrence of zoonotic diseases. Right? Can we learn more so that we can actually prevent some of these zoonotic diseases occurrence, right? So again, in the context of both basic science and the applied science, alternate source of energy, reduced use of dependence on the external energy itself, because sustainability doesn't mean that we just simply change the source of energy and then continue to live the way we live. We also need to reduce the amount of energy that we use and amount of entropy that we release to the environment, right? And also the lot of things we need to understand about the oceans. We hardly have any understanding of the oceans even today. And, because not many people work on oceans, and this is where something we need to look into it. We also need to see to what extent we are polluting rivers and through which we are polluting our oceans, to what extent we can reduce our dependency on river water so that the river continues to flow clean, so that oceans become clean. But, to save the world, we need to save the oceans first. The simple reason, logical reason for the student, all of you should understand, 70% of the Earth's surface is ocean. If Earth's surface is not clean, it's not likely to be, livable. And to make it clean, it's not enough. The terrestrial, atmosphere itself alone is clean. We have to make sure that ocean surface is also clean. To make it, there's a huge 70%. We live only in the remaining 30% of the land, whereas 70% of the ocean surface is being polluted because of our activity. How to save the ocean? How to save the ocean means you have to first save the rivers. To save the rivers means you should stop depending on the river water, stop polluting the rivers. There are a variety of different things one can do, right? Like, for example, most of us start living in cities. Our city, water, harvesting city level is something which is very important. Some of these things I'll skip. It's already been spoken about. Now, so obviously, this is where now I am coming to education. These are quite a different research topics. To do such research topics, we need to do the way we teach our students so that they are better prepared to take up the kind of research that is required, both in basic science and applied science in future. Not just future, it is today. We are through the pandemic right now. So today, tomorrow, we need this kind of research. For that, you need appropriate training, certain kinds of analytical ability, critical thinking, ability to connect your basic science to the real world problems. These are the kind of things which we need to learn. And this is what we need to, change our curriculum and the pedagogy, right? So in the last 5 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about the higher education, what we are going through now. Again, the way I told you, the kind of research that's going on virus, how it help in the way we can do research in other areas. Similarly, the kind of education system we are going through now because of the crisis, how it gives an opportunity to actually change ourselves for better, rather than worrying about today and getting depressed and going to a wrong path, right? So it's an opportunity to bring substantial changes, what I call as disruptive changes. All of you, particularly those who are in management, in commerce, or in a business, use the word disruptive change. Particularly those who are in IT also use disruptive technology, right? Now, we also need such kind of change in education, because education is something which is become stagnant for a very long time in this country. not only in this country, many parts of the world too. And we need to bring some disruptive changes. And this time has given an opportunity because it is already disrupted, right? You don't have to bring in disruptive change. Now it is disrupted. When you want to repair and bring it back together to older time, why can't we take it, mold itself to somewhere in the very futuristic, more positively, right? Instead of going back to world which was not so good as far as higher education is concerned, right? So one is we need to do the changes in our courses and our syllabi. There should be more foundational interdisciplinary courses. Your Vice Chancellor already mentioned about the importance of interdisciplinary courses, cross-disciplinary courses, right? So we need to bring in that kind of changes to our undergraduate level. There should be more emphasis on analytical and analytical methods and communication skills, right? The oral and as well as writing skills, creative and scientific writing is very, very important. And it's not that in Twitter, 160 characters, we communicate everything. We know that our communication skills are not that good. And that's one of the reasons many things also happening. The fake news, hoax, myths, and also sometimes it can lead to violence. Sometimes it can lead to problems, right? So our communication skills have to be improved, and that communication skill is also important to take policy decisions, right? What's happening in Baroda, for example, if a municipal commissioner explains to the, let's say, minister sitting in Ahmedabad, they know exactly what will happen if we take a decision to Baroda, so they know what kind of decision to be taken. We need to communicate all of these things properly in a very, very clear way, right? The policy decisions, becomes much easier. Of course, in science is much more important to communication skills, right? And so our education has lost that ability for imparting the communication skills. Now, rather than too many mandatory courses, because there is so much information available on the internet, I think we should develop more and more electives so the students actually choose what they want to learn, rather than we force them to learn, okay, you have to learn quantum physics of 1, 2, 3, and then you have to do quantum field theory, and then you do string theory and kind of stuff. Let students choose what they want to learn, right? And because there are so many online courses, then teachers can assess their ability to solve problems rather than simply testing the factual memory. At the pedagogy, we already know, most of you are, particularly the faculty who are listening to this talk here, are doing online teaching, right? So those who thought they will never be able to do online teaching, those of us who maybe were a bit critical about online teaching, that I'm a teacher, I'm most important person in the education world, unless I'm there physically in front of the student, how can we do any teaching, right? But the situation has forced us to change the way we teach, right? So can we actually use this as an advantage? Obviously, as a teacher, I still think physical presence of a teacher and physical interaction between the in real world interaction between the teacher and the student may be important, but we should use technology now, right, to improve it further. For example, not every course I had to teach. Let students learn something from online courses. My job is to see what they have learned, rather than, or facilitate, guide them through the process of learning, rather than trying to learn this topic, right? So teachers should focus on students who have difficulty in adapting to modern technology, or have difficulty in access to technology. This is another thing, the education system there is a lot of inequality, because students come from very diverse background. Not everybody will have the same level of learning ability. Current method of teaching is, I just go to the classroom, there are 200 students, I just give my lecture and give an examination, and who passes, they pass, who can't pass, they fail. What is that extra I do to help the people who cannot learn the way many other students can learn? Particularly, there are maybe first generation learners. But in the kind of the system I live in, it may be difficult for me to spare more time for the students who come from, from a background where they cannot learn so easily like other students. Now in this, where the technology can help, I can actually spare more time on the students who have difficulty in learning, right? Or even have access to technology. We can have more debate, discussion, peer learning, and and field and laboratory work more through student teams rather than, a single student doing it. So we can actually help them to learn through peer learning, by cooperative learning, collaborative learning, and so forth. Again, one of the things which is, again, some of us who are at the policy level, at the level of administration, we always worry about how to allocate funds. We're always limited funds. We need to build buildings. We have to make large campuses. Then how much we can actually spend money on things which are really important. Because of the technology, online learning, this campus may not be that important, right? We can actually spend more money for teachers training, which is most important thing. All of us are not trained to become teachers. We have done research and they also want to do some teaching. We have to do technology augmentation in our teaching. Maybe we should spend less on buildings and large campuses. We can actually campuses much more smaller. We can have more centralized laboratory facility. More distance learning is possible. Then, district level, you can set up some laboratories so that students can access to laboratories in the local area, so they can learn the experiments in physics, chemistry, and biology, somewhere locally, not necessarily travel to a longer distances, and have a campus which is built, and 50% of the time campus is unused and, unnecessarily wastage of resources. This saved money we can also use to, provide scholarship to needy students. And one thing we're going to sure happen, I'm sure already many of you have read newspapers and what, Geo is, it's more than 1 lakh crore rupees have been invested in Geo just last 1 month, because Geo has decided going to penetrate the entire country, interior part of the country with high bandwidth internet for education platforms. If that's the case, the cost of internet will come down, access to internet will be more equitable across the country, so that more and more students can come to the online learning mode, so that we can focus more on teachers training and how teachers can use technology to improve the quality of learning. So I'll stop here. I just wanted to give you an overview, because it's not in-depth analysis, because there's no much time to do all of the thing in a half an hour to 40 minutes, discussion. But I would be happy to, answer any questions and, doubts, or, if anybody has comments also, they can express their opinion and comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shashidhara. That was really an interesting talk. And now I would like Dr. Mayur Sahani, on behalf of the participants, if there are any questions, you can ask them.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ravi, for giving me this opportunity. And thanks, Professor Shashidhara, for sharing your wonderful view on COVID and how we can take up this challenge. From the attendees, we have questions, and I will read the questions on behalf of the attendees. So most of them are, they want to know whether a particular drug or vaccine is working or not. So to be particular, the Bangladesh doctors tested anti-parasitic drug, and the name of the drug is ivermectin, and it is combined with doxycycline, and they want to know, is it true or not?
So I'm so sorry, I'm not a pharmaceutical, expert here, nor I'm a virologist. I'm a general biologist, geneticist actually largely, and evolutionary biologist. So, I cannot answer specifically. What I know for sure is there are multiple, ways people are trying, and each country, they are trying their own favorite drugs, because they know, for example, hydroxychloroquine, this is the news all the time right now, because it's something which is very prevalently used in India because of the prevalence of malaria in India. And suddenly, when this became a possible drug, at least prophylactic, not for curative purposes, and everybody wanted to talk about it in India, right? Similarly, any drug that is being used, the antiparasitic drug that you mentioned in Bangladesh, there are some local diseases for which there are some local, drugs which people have developed and, are using. I'm sure everybody is trying their own favorite drugs and see if that works for their population. And so it could be one of them. I don't know the specific answer to that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I will skip one more question. So it is also on some of the drug, especially arthritis drug, which is used in COVID. But this one is interesting. So the question is like the purified inactivated SARS-CoV-2 virus, and another one vaccine, I think candidate or it's under the trial, Picovac, and one more vaccine BBI-BP3. So they produce neutralizing antibody, and they produce it is in mice. So the question is, if it is tested in mice, will it be useful while
Okay, so this is the old technique. It's the same thing. When any vaccine, earlier vaccines, before recombinant DNA technology was introduced, typically you use the inactivated virus, attenuated virus you call, as a vaccine, right? So virus is by heat inactivated or attenuated in some way, and then it is injected to a body, and then you raise antibodies against it, and next time when you have a real virus infecting, a viable one, and we are well protected, right? Now there are one aspect of it is that part. The second is the neutralizing antibody. There are two ways of doing. One is the immune system, where the antibodies are produced. That antibody will basically recognize the antigen, viral antigen, and promote and send it to the system, which basically sort of endocytoses the virus and then kills it. Another is called neutralizing virus antibodies, which are the first line defense again from the immune system, and which basically inhibits the virus doing anything more damage before the detailed immune system will have a time to attack on the virus. And those neutralizing antibodies are being produced using the cultured human cell lines and kind of thing, or using humanized mice. If you are using the humanized mice, in the sense the immune system is more humanized in the mouse, those neutralizing antibodies may work. But and neutralizing antibodies produced in mouse itself, it may not work for us.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the answer. And this one is, I think, from the emerging scientist. So he's asking that should a established scientist needs to change his research focus and start working on COVID, because it seems a lot of fund is available now.
So it's not that way, right? We change not because there is funding or anything, because we have an ability to contribute something. Right? For example, if I'm a biologist, I have some understanding of virology. I have the tools. Nothing wrong in changing our field forever, and then say, next 10 years, I'm going to work on COVID. Now, COVID problem as a societal problem may last only for 1 or 2 years, but as a scientific problem, it will be there for another 10, 15 years, right? Because this kind of a new zoonotic diseases causing the disease and spreading it, right? It would be actually a wonderful to work on it, so that next time we are better prepared if such a viral disease happens, right? For example, coronavirus itself, this is not the first one. This is the third or fourth coronavirus infecting human. So that means there is so much to work on this virus as a biologist, as a virologist. So there's nothing wrong an established person, because established person moving means you can also start at a much faster pace, because you're already an experienced person. It's actually, one should welcome that, right? And it's not necessarily because there's money, it's because there are lots of interesting questions.
Yeah,
Professor
thank you.
Shashidhara, I would like to ask a continuing question on this. So, all the funding agencies right now are mobilizing their funds towards COVID research. So is this going to affect the other areas, or there is a specifically money diverted or devoted to this research?
Not really. It's a very temporary diversion, right? For example, what money they are providing is also only if you can provide the results in the next 6 months to 1 year. There's no long-term research on COVID, which is every money is being diverted. That means in the next 10 years, as if there's no money for anything else other than COVID. For example, if you apply saying that I want to work on COVID, and next 2 to 3 years sometime I may be able to think of a drug, it will not be funded now, right? It will be funded like any other biology project. But if you say, I have an idea, I can develop a neutralizing antibody, or I can develop a drug or tested drug which is already there, or I can actually understand the life cycle of this virus in Indian context, or is Indian and the virus is just spreading in India, are they different than the other, in the other country? These are kind of things will have an immediate utility of the results in the next 2 to 3 months or 6 months. Only that kind of research is being funded. So any diversion of funding which is happening, it's only have an impact for the next 1 year. It's, of course, there is impact already, and there will be an impact not only for R&D, it's everywhere. Railways can't expand their new track or electrification. National highways, conversion is all stalled right now. How many metro rail projects are stalled? Many of them may not get started again for another year because money has been diverted to address the COVID problem. Similarly, in research also, there is some diversion. It's going to impact for next 1 year, but not long.
But do you see this as foresee this as an opportunity to increase overall funding in next coming years, because
Yes.
the importance of research?
Yeah, I mean, that's our wishful thinking, and there are some indication that it may happen because people have realized this, not only India, the science was never except in Europe, and US science is always funded because it gave visibility, publicity, and also it was a big business opportunity, whether it's space or vaccines or drugs or whatever it is. But basic science is still not so popular even in US. In India now, the science is being, looked up as a respectful way, saying that it can help and solve the problem. Right? Science has gained more visibility and traction now, and hopefully we can, keep that momentum and get more funding, and hopefully it will improve the way we do science. Of course, it's also our responsibility the how quality science we do, so that we don't lose the respect that public is, giving us.
And also, I believe that quality science reporting of all kind of research to general public will also help it.
Exactly. To some it's happening. Newspapers are quoting more of scientists than politicians about the virus.
Thank you. You can go ahead.
Yeah. So we have one of the most asked question, I guess. So this COVID-19 condition is a man-made or it's a natural one? What is your view, Professor?
So it's a naturally occurring viral disease. The spread is, I already made, is man-made, is simply because way we live, for example, if there are slums of Dharavi, had more infection, is simply because of the crowding, the kind of habitat that we had for human in that place, and also the air travel or train travel and the speed at which it started spreading across the world. But the virus, it's unequally has been established based on the variety of different methods that its origin is bats, and it first got jumped into one other mammalian host, and people are predicting it could be a pangolin, but there is still some debate going on. But definitely it is a bat origin virus. It is not a laboratory made virus. It's not an artificial virus introduced by human to the human population.
Yeah, one more question is coming up, and they are asking, it's interesting one, how the conference, international conference would be held and how it would be funded.
I know all of us, particularly our students, young students, are always looking forward to conferences for two reasons. One is you participate in big conference, meet scientists, you understand more about the kind of science happening in the world. At the same time, it's also an opportunity to visit other places, right? I mean, it's like paid tourism, right? We all saw so much of Paris or New York, not because of, we had money to go in as a tourist, simply because we are all poor people. And somehow we got some money to travel in the name of conference, and we also saw something else, right? So that it definitely, because when money is little for research, it's unlikely that equal amount of money will be given for conferences. So conference is going to be, one of those, maximally hit amongst all the things in science and technology enterprise. But there will be more e-conferences, and better technology may come for organizing e-conferences, so that the amount of interaction that scientist and the student or audience will have in a conference setting, and hopefully will maintain to that extent. but we don't know how it's going to affect.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, sir. Ravi, how much time I have? There are a couple of questions.
Uh, can I I want to comment. I'm Sarita Gupta.
Sure.
I just want to request, sir, that what message you would like to give to the students who are just going to complete their post graduation, and if they are trying to go for PhD and those kind of things, what are the areas they should now look forward for? Because as you said, it is a temporary thing, that COVID, but still, what do you think? What is your comment for them, so
Sure.
that they will get some benefit of
Yeah.
your view?
So in fact, I spend maximum amount of time on that particular topic. So what I was trying to say is, what many things that we were doing in our lab, we realized that it actually can solve certain real life problems.
Yeah, that
Students who are doing
is a very good,
RT-PCR now
yes.
realized that they could do diagnostics.
Sure,
Students who are
sure.
doing some pre-protein expression purification, now they can do antibody development against this virus by protein expression purification against the viral protein. Similarly, people who are doing all kinds of mathematics and physics and complex system physics are now become epidemiologists. They're doing all kinds of mathematical modeling of making prediction of what is or not for India, and same thing for vaccine development and everywhere. And those who are in artificial intelligence, machine learning, they are already using that for predicting new viral mutants and start making vaccines against that particular one, so that even tomorrow viral mutates and becomes something different, they can start making vaccine against them right away, right? So in a way, people who never even thought that they would be working on a disease like this have actually entered into this domain. So what my sort of message to the young students is, learn skills, analytical skill. The methods of science is one, right? Analytical, critical thinking, peer review and objectivity of science, unbiased observation. These are some of those things which are called transferable skills. It doesn't matter whether you want to work on plants, animals, or microbes, or any other aspect of the life, but you should be able to laterally move to another area very quickly if you know methods of science. Similarly, the fundamental concepts of biology, if you're assuming that there are more biologists in the audience. So
Yes.
genetics, evolution, biochemistry, physiology, and molecular biology, 4 or 5 topics are well learned. It doesn't matter they show interest tomorrow in agriculture or in diseases or in the marine biology. They can immediately shift to any area of their interest, or what could be considered as topical, and more funding is available for that kind of a problem. So more and more applied research will get funding, there's no doubt, but that requires a lot of basic science also, because our basic science is still not reaching that we can solve problem one by one very quickly. Every problem still requires a lot of amount of basic science to be done, and that's the kind of combination of research students can think of doing. But I think there's no doubt that there will be more scope for doing research. There'll be more PhD fellowship. There'll be more postdoctoral fellowship after this 1 year of maybe a small gap. But things will go beyond our things. But there will be some changes, and students should be ready to work on some very more interesting problems in a way.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Professor Ravi. I have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, 2 more questions.
Yeah, okay. So one question has just came. So the attendee is asking whether is there a potential that India will come up with the COVID-19 vaccine?
Well, not really. Well, it's there are 1 or 2 companies are working on it. For example, I should not say no. I know there are 1 or 2 companies are working on it, but the number of companies working outside the India is many more, right? But again, who may become successful? There's it's difficult to say, because vaccines have variety of different criteria to become successful, right? Because finally it has to be successful in a human body. It should generate memory antibodies, and so that next time when there is an infection, we are better prepared for the infection, right? And the chances are always higher in places where there is already an experience how to make vaccines, right? So in India, for example, vaccines are produced for hepatitis C in a couple of places in Hyderabad, and they are using that experience to produce anti-COVID vaccines. But other than that, there aren't that many any major players in India. But there are vaccine producing company like Serum Institute in Pune is one of the largest vaccine producers and distributor to the world, right? So they are tied up with Oxford Moderna. If Moderna antibody vaccines become successful, it will be anyway produced in India. India going to supply not only to India and also to the other parts of the world. So to that extent, India will contribute. How it contributes, it's okay whether we can't think of a new vaccine. At least we will be in the forefront of producing large amount of vaccines at affordable rate so that we can supply to the world. It's not that only Europe. There are huge number of people in Africa, in South America, in all those places. They need low-cost vaccines at affordable rate. So India can play a big role in all of that.
Okay. And okay, let me take these last questions, and I think it has a social impact. So the attendee is asking that during this lockdown situation, and even now where the education institutes are not in a full functional mode, how the students keeps themselves motivated.
Yeah, this is more of a, to some extent philosophical question, right? Now, what is life and what drives us to do things? Because the suffering of people is there all the time, right? So should we directly go and live with them and help them to live better? Or should we do something so that we don't recur such problems in future? There are 2-3 different things one can do. For example, in my science, if I do well, if it helps to save thousands of lives, because of whatever work I do, the scientific results or scientific the product out of my science, right? Indirectly or indirectly, because for example, if a vaccine is produced today against coronavirus, is not because of 10 people working on that vaccine today. It is the work of thousands of PhD students all over the world who have contributed to that kind of a field by making vaccines, right? So all of that knowledge is integrated to push the frontiers to make quickly a progress when there is a crisis. So if I say that, okay, I'll give up everything, I'll go and help, the migrant workers or poor agriculture families and all. If I can do it, if I have resources, if I have ways of doing it, I should do it. Let's say if I don't know anything about it, what else I can do it? Should I just go and help them physically and doing some work for them? Or if I do something better, if I can do good science through which I can help the society and future such kind of problems are less in number, I think I should do good science. So that's the, what, one should do. Based on our ability, what is that best we can do? What honestly, what we can do, it always helps the society. You look at today, the diabetic patients in India, they're one of the largest number of diabetic patients are in India, right? The insulin, it costs just 5 rupees per dose. How insulin was made available at such low cost in India? Because of the recombinant DNA technology. Large number of people are working on it. There are so many recombinant DNA companies in India, and hundreds of PhDs, biology PhDs are working, or chemistry and chemical technology people are working there. All of them are contributing, and by reducing the health burden of the poor people, because diabetes is also one of the diseases where poor people are maximally affected, because diabetes won't come simply because you eat a lot of sugar. Diabetes comes because of malnutrition, much more than eating more sugar, right? And of course, because of the genetic factors. So in that context, we are, many of our biology students and scientists have contributed immensely to alleviate the societal problem. So we should continue to do what we can do best.
Okay, thanks, Professor Shashidhara. I will hand over to the Ravi.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Ravi,
lot of
Ravi,
questions. Yes, ma'am.
is there a time, just one comment I want to discuss with sir. If
Okay,
it
go
is
ahead.
uh, Dr. Shashidhara, I am just trying to understand that if suppose the universities or small colleges, they want to contribute in this COVID-19, like maybe as you said, epidemiological or something, a retrospective study with respect to what are the type of people who are getting infected, what is the mortality, what is the comorbidity, all those kind of simple things. But how to get the assessment, like we are unable to assess the things from the hospitals. So as a policy maker in many committees, is there any way that the hospitals can give their uh, some of the data to us so that we can actually do some kind of work which may
No,
not, which will be very, very important?
that's true. So now I see that, that realization has come. That's one of the things which India was lacking behind, because the data was not properly shared, or
Yeah,
clinical samples are not properly shared.
sure, sure. That's
ICMR has
where we.
issued a guideline now that there should be more open sharing of clinical material with researchers, as long as they maintain certain ethical standards and the biosafety guidelines. So I think one should be able to get viral samples, or if you don't have facility, attenuated viral samples, you can sequence the genome or take the RNA and do some work, raise some antibodies, and all kinds of things can try now.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I think there are more questions coming up, but yeah, I think we are now.
No,
running
I
out
also
of
need
time.
to go now.
Yes, yes. So I would like
Already
to now
5:40.
express my sincere thanks first to Professor Shashidhara to accept our invitation and deliver this webinar on very pertinent topic. Thank you, sir. Also, the webinar would not have been successful without the participants. We had participants including students, research scholars, as well as faculty members from all over India, from Tamil Nadu to Punjab, from Rajasthan to Assam. So thanks to all of you. Also, I would like to thank Professor Parimal Vyas, Vice Chancellor of the MS University of Baroda, for all the support and motivation. Also to Dr. Chudasma, who is officiating registrar of the MS University, to hold this webinar with his support. Also, Professor Hari Kataria, Dean Faculty of Science, for his interest and support. Also, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Arun Anand, who made this social media available for us, and also Dr. Chirayu Pandit, who made it possible to go Facebook Live. Thank you to all of you.